Great. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're still waiting for a few folks to join us, but we would like to start with a couple of quick poll questions just to understand who's coming into this webinar. So our first question, which should pop up on your screen, is just to understand what institution you're representing today. If you can respond to that poll question, we'll get a sense of who all are in the room. All right, we'll be closing the poll soon. Great. So looks like we have about 50% banks or credit unions, another 36% representation by fintechs, and a few not-for-profits. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. We have one more question for you, just to understand how you think COVID-19 has affected savings behavior for your customers, stakeholders, or employees in the last 1 or 2 months. Great. So we can see that savings has increased. That's what many of you have experienced. A few of you have also said that savings has decreased. This is really interesting, and it actually gels very well with the discussion we are planning to have today, because we are seeing a lot of data around how savings behavior is being impacted by the crisis, and we have really informed and well-researched data that we will be sharing with you today. So thank you all for joining us today. Just to do a quick run on the agenda here, we will start with some welcome and introductions. We will do an audience poll that we just completed. We are going to then move on to a panelist discussion. We will then have some time for audience questions, and we will end with some final thoughts. I do want to point out that we will be taking audience questions throughout the webinar. You can use the chat box, in the question panel that you may have access to, and please type in your questions as you go along. We do have our team members who are monitoring that question panel and will be sharing with us audience questions that we can respond to either throughout the webinar or at the end when we have time for audience questions. This webinar is actually the third in a series that we are conducting as part of the Blackrock Emergency Savings Initiative. The earlier 2 webinars are available as recordings on our website, savingsproject.org. And this particular webinar is being recorded as well and will be available on that website as well. So just to start off with introductions, I'm Chandni Ori. I'm a director at the Financial Health Network, and I am also leading our savings work at the Financial Health Network. I am working very closely with many of the panelists here on making emergency savings available to a whole range of low and moderate income families, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So the topic of today's webinar is around emergency savings. And we know that we are currently, all of us are facing an emergency in the form of the COVID-19 crisis. This is in many ways a very unique time for all of us. And what we're seeing is that people are responding in very different ways to this crisis. And especially in the context of savings, we are seeing a mix of strategies as well as tools that people are using to manage their financial lives and utilize their savings and leverage the assets that they have. In fact, some of the data that we have shows that almost 54% of Americans have already dipped into their emergency savings, which were not a lot to start off with. At the same time, we are also seeing polls that report that more than half of Americans are also putting aside money in savings. In fact, the personal savings rate hit an historic 33% in April. And this is this kind of data we are seeing after several years. The personal savings rate obviously has been much lower in the past few years, just before the crisis hit. So what do we want to do today? We want to accomplish, trying to get a deeper understanding of what are the different segments that are impacted by this crisis and their response, especially in terms of their access to savings and use of savings. We also want to understand how you, as financial institutions or as employers, can help people do the right thing in terms of building savings as they're also experiencing a crisis. We want to focus this discussion as much as possible on low and moderate income people, because that's where many of the challenges lie in terms of their ability to cope with crisis. And I also want to highlight the fact that this particular webinar is being sponsored by the Blackrock Emergency Savings Initiative. This is an initiative that was started quite precisely, it feels like now, about a year ago in 2019. And the mission of the initiative is to help low and moderate income families gain access to savings tools and strategies, ideally, ultimately helping them to establish a very important safety net for themselves. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists for the day. And let's start with Quentin from Even. Quentin, please introduce yourself.
Hey, I forgot that we were going to have the picture of me with my pre-COVID haircut. So that's what I look like when I don't have to buzz cut myself at home. So I'm Quentin Farmer. I'm one of the founders of Even. We're a startup that works with employers to offer better financial health building benefits to employees. Specifically in the context of this conversation, of one of the products that we offer to employers is a payroll-linked emergency savings product. So it's an app that employees can use that actually sets money aside, a little bit like a 401k, into an emergency savings fund every payday. Talk a little bit more about that later on, but happy to be here.
Great. Brian, you want to go next?
Sure, absolutely. And unfortunately, I can't blame COVID-19 for the change in my appearance. It's been much longer than that. I think I might need to update my picture, but Brian Gilmore, I'm a director at Commonwealth. We're a mission-driven organization that is committed to helping people, financially vulnerable people, achieve financial security, access opportunities, and ultimately build wealth. And we seek to achieve that mission by partnering with organizations across sectors, including employers, financial service providers, nonprofits, and policymakers to conduct consumer research, design, test, and evaluate interventions to address financial challenges and to drive effective solutions to scale. We're also proud to be a part of the Blackrock Emergency Savings Initiative with Financial Health Network and Common Sense Lab.
Great, thank you, Brian. Emery, you go next.
Sure. I'll just start off by echoing Brian's statement. We're at the Common Sense Lab also very excited to be part of this initiative with Commonwealth and with Financial Health Network. So the Common Sense Lab is actually a behavioral science research center that is housed within the Center for Advanced Hindsight, which is then in turn housed within Duke University. So it's a little bit of a Russian doll situation. But for us, we're specifically interested in financial decision making, and we in particular, we partner with a range of different organizations to leverage insights from behavioral science to optimize or to improve the products and services that they offer. Ultimately working, to achieve both outcomes that are beneficial for the end user, for the client, but also helping organizations that are doing really great work and helping to improve the community to help them sort of reach the goals that they want as an organization as well. So it's sort of this sort of two-pronged approach where we're providing support for organizations, ultimately hoping to improve the financial well-being of low and moderate income households across the United States.
Great. Thank you, all of you. I'm very excited for the session that we have planned for today. And I know that in prepping for this session, I learned a lot already, and I'm hoping we can share some of those learnings with our participants today. So I'm going to start with the first question, just focused on spending, actually, because that is a big factor in how much we can save. So Emery, I'm going to start with you just to get your thoughts on the fact that, there's data that shows, and our own experience shows, that spending is actually down for a lot of people, because a lot of discretionary expenses are out. People are not spending as much on childcare, on commuting, on travel. So the fact that they now have this money that they're not spending, does this actually mean that they can just treat it as savings? What's the difference from a behavioral perspective between not spending and saving? And how do we help people make that transition from not spending to savings?
Thanks. Yeah, no, actually, it's a really interesting question. And I actually, in some ways, it's sort of really an ongoing question about how do you differentiate between the two. Because, in some ways, if you think about what short-term or emergency savings is, it's actually, it could just be essentially just slack in somebody's budget. It's something that gives people a little bit of extra breathing room. It makes it easier for them to overcome shocks and expenses. And just having access to liquidity, we know can really improve those things. And so in some ways, not spending and having a little bit of extra money in your checking account actually serves that purpose. So not spending and saving are equivalent. It's just money that's available. And especially when, but in some ways it's important to differentiate the two. And when people try to differentiate the two, they oftentimes try to assign some amount of intentionality to saving. They want to say, like, the difference between not spending and saving is that people choose to save and they set it aside. And I think that really is probably not actually the most important thing, even though I do think there is something about sort of putting some sort of motivation or goal directedness towards saving. But I think it's the way people differentiate it. But the way from a behavioral perspective that I think I would differentiate is that it really sort of ignores the importance of partitioning or setting savings aside as something separate. One of the things that research has consistently shown is that people are just not as likely to draw across accounts or draw across mental accounts. So being able to put up those partitions that sort of separate and categorize the available liquidity into different categories, I think that is really where we will see a difference between what counts as not spending and saving. So the extent that we can help individuals either categorize their savings in different ways and set up sort of soft or mental partitions, or to the extent that we can, as financial institutions or people who have access to these sorts of things, create hard partitions, actually help people set aside their funds into different accounts. To the extent that we can do that, I think that's where we'll be able to use the increased liquidity to actually increase savings and help people build that sort of financial cushion that we know to be so important to people's financial lives.
Great. So the fact that people have this liquidity, but they need to be able to separate it either like in their financial accounts, or if not that, just at least mentally to say, okay, I have these extra $200 and I'm going to save that for an emergency. That seems to be a really critical point in making sure that money is just not spent and that money is actually saved, for future use. Just building on top of that, Brian, this is a question targeted towards you. We talked about the decrease in spending and how that might be facilitating people to save money. We also have some increase in access to funds, especially through the stimulus payments, for example. And so we wanted to understand how that access to stimulus funds may potentially also help people put that money into savings if people do not have to use that money right away. And we did a poll recently, and that showed that people who have received stimulus payments, about 23% have spent all of it, which actually, if you flip it, that means almost 77% have not used all of it, and that might be available to be saved or for future use. So any thoughts on that in terms of how people can leverage that injection of funds?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the opportunity. So I wrote a blog post recently that sort of speaks to that opportunity And it was really intended in regards to the stimulus payments, but it speaks to this broader opportunity that we see for financial institutions and fintechs to try to use a data-driven approach to help consumers translate intention into action, particularly during what we think of as windfall moments, where people receive this sort of atypical influx of income at a specific time. And there's pretty robust research on this, primarily drawn from the tax time moment when people receive a refund, which demonstrates that if you encourage people to pre-commit to use funds for specific use before that income arrives and make it really easy to act on that commitment, then you can support people in meeting their financial goals. So we saw the stimulus payment as one of those opportunities where there was this anticipated influx of income, and to the extent that financial institutions and fintechs were prepared to support people with managing those funds, that seemed like a clear opportunity to us. Commonwealth ran a tax time savings program for a number of years called Save Your Refund, and we use these principles to help people save a part of their tax refund, which led to 18,000 filers saving over $15 million, the vast majority of whom were low to moderate income. But this program was primarily promoted through the tax filing system and the free volunteer tax assistance sites that help people file their taxes for free rather than financial institutions. So, when we looked at that and sort of applied that to the stimulus payments, we saw that for banks, credit unions, fintechs, they have data that says, when a customer has an influx of income, whether that's a refund, stimulus check, or another windfall, and timely messages, nudges, and possibly incentives can be a really powerful tool to use, especially if you can anticipate that windfall and provide some way for the consumer to make a commitment to use that fund to save, to spend down debt, or for whatever their financial goals are. And I think we know that not all financial institutions have the sort of data analytics capability to do this in a sophisticated way, but we think even lower touch interventions like asking customers about their financial goals and then sending a personalized message before or at the time of a windfall can go a really long way. One final point on this is that, we see this not just as an opportunity for financial institutions and fintechs, but also for employers. Commonwealth has conducted research that suggests that the moment of a raise can serve as a windfall moment. There's other research that talks about that additional paycheck that happens for folks who are paid on a biweekly cadence. So for employers or financial institutions who can kind of see that opportunity, anticipate it, and provide consumers tools and well-timed nudges, messages, or incentives to translate into action, we think that's a powerful opportunity. And the stimulus check was sort of a moment for that. And if there are future stimulus checks, we hope that employers and financial institutions will think about ways that they can take action related to them.
Great. That's really insightful, Brian. So I think one of the things to think about for the people who are in this webinar is to reflect on how they can continue to message or nudge their customers or employees to set aside money that they may have already received. But maybe even better so is to be prepared for either another round of stimulus checks or perhaps tax refund, given the fact that tax deadline has been extended, and see how they can be better prepared to facilitate setting aside that money into savings for the stakeholders that they have. That's great. Quinton, towards the end, Brian talked about the role of employers, not just financial institutions, in helping people set aside money for savings, especially when they have access to data around payroll, around extra funds that employees might be getting as part of bonus or an extra paycheck. So we would like to understand from you, how are you working with different employers to help them improve financial health for their employees? And in specific terms, what are employers doing to help employees save money?
Yeah, so to answer this, I actually speak first to programs that we had that were in place with employers before COVID started, and I'll also talk a little bit about what we're seeing in the broader market. So, for employers that were already working with Even prior to COVID, for a little bit of context, we already had about 100,000 people using our emergency savings program every payday, right? So we had a base of people who were already saving, already participating. And what we've seen change since then in terms of how the employers are promoting this program and thinking about this program. One, I'd say we're actually relatively overrepresented, for example, in retail, where of course there's been a surge in hours worked. Specifically one of our customers is Walmart. There's been a surge of bonuses paid out, which I think has been fantastic. Brian, you spoke about the positive impacts of those types of windfalls. And so what we've seen since then is that there's been about a 25% increase in the number of people participating in the savings program. So there's just an overall increase in interest. But separately from that, there's been an 80% increase in the balance of people's savings in the savings program. And so basically what I see there is, companies that have already invested in a financial health program like Even, and also are doing things like implementing bonuses and additional pay and the like, we're seeing the results of that carry through to successful growth in savings balances. So that's something we've been very happy with. When I zoom out and I look at the market more broadly, including companies we speak to who aren't yet offering a program like Even, we really see two categories of companies. So the first are the ones who, like in healthcare and in retail, have seen a surge of hours worked for their employees, and the problem that they're trying to solve is much more, hey, our employees' lives have been disrupted. Maybe they have a new childcare expense, or they have changes in their budget. You mentioned a few reduced commuting expenses and things like that. How do we help people cope with that volatility? So that's what they're coming to us, and they're talking about our budgeting programs and savings programs. Quite frankly, we also have a lot of companies that are thinking about what to do when they reopen, right? They've had a huge number of employees who are not working at all. Of course, hopefully they've been able to access stimulus money and CARES Act payments, but they're thinking a lot about what does that day one back to work look like from a financial health standpoint? And how do we have people come back and start rebuilding savings that may have been spent down during this time?
Great, that's really helpful because you touched upon the fact that people are also starting to think about what's going to happen in quote unquote recovery, and that feels like a whole other sort of topic in question. But in relation to savings, it's very, very pertinent, because what we are experiencing and what we are seeing in the data is that there's certainly a segment of people who have either stable incomes or have maybe even excess liquidity at this time, either through stimulus payments or bonus payments or whatever, who are able to set aside money now. But there's also people who perhaps are not able to set aside money now, but will be in a position to do that once they once we are all in a recovery phase and they have reestablished employment and things like that. So I think we, as financial institutions, as an employers, we need to be thinking about not just about what we can do in the moment right now, but also how do we prepare for that next phase coming up. So that's really interesting. Before we move on to sort of our next section, just want to take a poll through all three of you here. Like, in this current moment, sometimes talking about savings feels like it's so disconnected with reality when we are hearing, and seeing all of these articles and news about people, not being able to manage their day-to-day expenses. And yet we have all of this data that shows people are saving as well. So when you think about working on savings right now in this current moment, what is it that's driving like your perspective and your action? Take a shot at it. I went off script a little bit.
I can jump in. I think when I think about our product and where we sit, we have a little bit of an advantage in that we know what people's earning situation is. And generally speaking, because of the budgets that people build in Even, we also know their broader financial situation. So for example, we frequently have visibility into a spouse's earnings, right? Even if somebody gets us through their employer, their spouse may also go into the same account and deposit into the same account. So we have some understanding. And so we're in a place where our messaging can be relatively nuanced. And if we know that you're getting more hours, we know that you're earning more, you can bet that we're going to prompt you to save. On the flip side, if we have someone in our network who's been furloughed, which certainly has been the case, we're not going to send them that message, right? I think it was Brian, you made the point that, not all financial institutions or not all service providers have full visibility into the full picture of people's finances. But I think even basic things like, is a direct deposit changing substantially? Is it going up? Is it going down? Those are basic signals that a financial institution can use to guide some of the messaging they might send to somebody to nudge them in a savings direction.
And maybe Quentin, to build off something you mentioned, just related to your current relationships, one thing that we've been thinking about is how do you target the institutions that may still be employing people and may be paying out those bonuses. So, when you think about, from Commonwealth's perspective, we think about who the appropriate partners are to talk about this issue. And, we know that some industries are, hiring or increasing hours or paying out bonuses. Those might be the institutions to approach to talk to about this being an opportunity to discuss savings. So, there's a nuance or segmentation even at the kind of partner level for us, and organizations like retailers might be pretty well positioned to talk to, their quote unquote end users, their employees about savings at this moment. So I think that's, one other angle to take. And then, one other brief point is that I don't know if this is specifically relevant to the current moment, but I think, for us not being paternalistic and saying, you were hit with an emergency and you didn't have an emergency savings, you should have, done something better, you need to prepare for the next one. We think that, not being paternalistic is kind of a standard to set throughout your financial security work. But I think that's even more true in this current moment. And in some ways, the extent of this pandemic and the fact that it is very clearly out of everyone's control, I think reinforces that issues of financial security are not, a personal responsibility challenge only. They often relate to circumstances outside of folks' control, lack of access to appropriate products and services, et cetera. So I think outside of this pandemic, but in the current moment, ensuring that we're being sort of understanding of the circumstance folks are in is really critical.
Yeah, I'll jump in as well. And I think the point that I'd like to make sort of echoes and builds on Brian's point a little bit there, and really thinking about oftentimes when we say savings, and one of the reasons I think people think that it feels tone deaf in the moment is that we kind of think about savings as something that you put aside and don't use. We kind of equate emergency savings as if it were retirement savings, and I just don't think that that's the case. And I think the way that I'm thinking about savings these days is actually just I shorten the time frame. So maybe I'm not thinking about saving for 2 months now. Maybe I'm thinking about saving for 2 weeks. And the truth of the matter is people's time horizons have shifted in that way. And so, maybe we're helping people put aside a little bit so that they can make sure that they're paying rent at the end of the month, or that they have enough money to be able to continue to not fall into some sort of situation of food insecurity. And so I think when I'm thinking about savings now, I'm thinking about savings on just a shorter time horizon, and people still need, support, and people need tools and they need structure to be able to navigate sort of what's becoming an increasingly complex financial situation. So I don't think it's tone deaf to think about savings, but you can also frame it as something like, how do you help make sure that are able to make ends meet at the end of the month? I think that doesn't feel tone deaf, even though in the world it's sort of the same thing. Emergency savings is meant to be built and drawn down. That's my point.
Yeah. I know, Quentin, you mentioned in a conversation that one of your products allows people to shift their bills. Can you explain that a little bit? I'm not sure I really got that. So
yeah, I mean, Emery, I love the way you framed that. An anti-goal when we first designed our savings product, and what we explicitly said, okay, we're not optimizing for this, is to push people to build a big balance and keep it there. And instead, we designed it to give people flexibility and liquidity in how they thought about using these funds. And so, interestingly enough, we haven't seen a big change in this usage pattern since the COVID crisis started. But generally speaking, when we look at how people use savings at Even, it's often just planning for something that's a couple weeks out or a month or two out. And it's often just putting aside $100 to add on to the paycheck that would normally be used to pay for rent. And so it's these little shifts of money that end up being incredibly meaningful. Because if you successfully push $100 just a couple weeks out into the future, you might save yourself a $35 overdraft fee when that rent payment is due. And so those little shifts end up being really impactful in people's financial health when they add up over the course of a year.
I'll also just continuing, I think that's great. I think to also what Brian mentioned earlier about the windfalls, one thing we know about the way that people respond to windfalls is they tend to have a little bit of a spend right at the beginning where they sort of double spend a little bit. And so there's been some nice data out there from folks at like SaverLife and some other places that have been looking at this, who've seen that there is this sort of like small percentage bump of spending on the day they receive the windfall, and then it's sort of put it around the savings. So even though people haven't used all of their check, I still think there's a little bit of spending right up front, which is great. I think people probably need a little bit of breathing room and a little bit of slack. Not trying to say that that's not optimal in any way, but in some ways it's like if people needed that later on, what can we do to help sort of keep that from not spending it in the first 2 weeks and bumping it to the later point? So.
Great. This has been really informative for me and I hope for our participants as well. We want to hear from our participants at this point in time. So we actually have a couple of polls coming up just to get a perspective. Also, we are continuing to collect audience questions. So please continue to put them in the question panel and we will try to address them as we go through the rest of the webinar. So here's the next poll coming up. Okay, so more than 40% of our participants here think that savings is actually extremely important for households in terms of the priorities that they're facing. And another 38% say it's moderately important as well. So I think that sort of answers our question that we were talking about earlier on, whether talking about savings in this moment is relevant and hopefully is not coming across as tone deaf. All right, we have one more polling question coming up. Okay, so about 25% of the participants say that we are currently focused on responding to the current crisis, and another 75% are actively planning for the recovery phase. So that's really interesting to hear, and in fact, some of our next few questions are going to talk about, a little bit about the future and what can organizations who are preparing for the recovery phase also plan for and prepare with. Before we get into our next set of questions, I want to take one audience question, which is quite interesting. It says, is credit card actually a form of emergency savings? And how do the panelists view short-term credit as an alternative to emergency savings? Any thoughts on that?
I can take it, or at least take a first stab at it. Would love to hear what the other folks are thinking about as well. So I don't think it's the same thing, but I think it's complementary. I think it's particularly, in times of emergency, it's really important to have access to credit. It's kind of like a cash infusion, which has been a really interesting topic lately, but thinking about how is this something that people can draw on sort of their future self to be able to support their current self. And so it's a little bit of a drawing on that as a person who can support you. Your in some ways, credit can be a really powerful ally, but the problem is that sometimes I think credit, when if the terms are wrong, the interest rate's wrong, especially when you start getting into more alternative sort of payday loans and that space, is that they become cyclical and they actually just sort of deepen the financial the negative financial circumstances. And so I think in some ways it offsets the negative consequences of not having a financial cushion, but it doesn't necessarily it's not necessarily a substitute for emergency savings. But I would love to hear what Brian or Quentin feel. Same boat.
Yeah, I could just chime in to say that I think that this question and Emery, your response, I think illustrates the challenge of sometimes drawing bright lines between different financial products. And we often try to think about, what is the job to be done for the customer and what's the appropriate solution in a given moment. And I think in the real world, there are just, a bunch of different sort of siloed products that are used for different purposes that don't often interact. And so, we often think about, are there versions of products that are hybrids where there are savings and credit components, or that, in the future we are able to use algorithms or, smart assessments in real time to direct people to, get access to affordable, responsibly, developed credit in times when they don't have that financial cushion, and then pull down from that financial cushion as needed, and that it's not always on the consumer to make that decision of, do I use credit in this moment? Do I use savings in this moment? But that, there are sort of systems and structures to make these decisions easier. And I think that's, a bit of a reimagining of how financial products work. I think there are some examples of this, like credit builder loans or secured credit cards that are kind of getting at this, the two sides of the same coin. But we see, I think, opportunities for more innovation to ensure that consumers sort of have the right product available to them with the, appropriate features and functionality for that specific need, so that it's not always on that consumer to make those really tough choices.
And you guys gave really good, nuanced answers. I'm going to come out a little bit stronger. I don't think these can be viewed as complements. And I want to say specifically why, and this is a big part of our product design and product development thinking. The only thing in all the products that y'all just mentioned and talked about, which are valuable products, the only thing that actually represents something that gives autonomy and future control to the folks that we serve is savings, right? So credit cards, forms of credit absolutely can solve really concrete problems for people, and that can be important. But when we think about building for increased autonomy and increased ownership of your financial life over time, there's no way that credit can be a replacement for that. And so that's, again, I think both the answers given were really good and represented the difficulty of designing these products. But I think that autonomy point is one I just want to hammer home. I think emergency savings are so key in helping households build autonomy over what happens to them, week to week, month to month in their financial life.
I totally agree. I think that's a really important point, and I just want to marry the point that Brian made and Quentin made, which I think is there's a real awesome opportunity for building in savings into credit products. As Brian was mentioning, one of the things that we've seen that's been a really successful thing that we've seen in our work is these sorts of loan to savings programs. And I think it's even more important if you're in the short term small dollar lending space, if you are thinking about offering a payday alternative, if you're thinking about extending small loans. One of the things we've seen is that building in a savings component to that, so people build savings as they repay that loan, puts people in a significantly better place down the line. So we conducted an analysis of sort of the stretch to save loans. And one of the things we found is that people were in much better financial circumstances after 6 and 9 months after the fact by having that opportunity to do that. So I think that's a really good point, that credit by itself is sort of not living up to the opportunities. There's always the chance that you could be helping people to sort of secure their own financial future and put them back in a place where they do have that kind of sense of ownership. So I think that's a really good point.
And I'll say my secret hope is that these hybrid products make the credit component completely unnecessary because people build up that financial cushion. So yeah, it's to sort of make it obsolete by building that emergency savings.
Great. So this is, I think those are very interesting, responses and perspectives, but coming at it from different angles. But I think there's a lot of common ground as well in what we just shared. Just to sort of build on this a little bit, when we think about the examples, Emery, you shared with the savings plus credit products, and how that helps people build savings. I think there are some other behavioral elements built into that, right? The fact that they're just setting aside money in an automated way. Can you talk about a few of other behavioral elements that you have seen that can really help people set aside money for savings?
Yeah, I think there's like a couple of different approaches that you can take, and obviously this is also a growing and a growing research base. So I'm not going to be able to cover the full spectrum of things, and I think there's a lot of opportunities to continue to learn more. But some things that we've seen that have been really helpful is one, helping people make the decision to start saving in advance. And so I think some of the things we talked about earlier were around these windfall payments and these opportunities that come throughout the person's financial life. COVID stimulus checks obviously are a clear example of the kind of windfall, but the truth is people have all of these kinds of influxes of money throughout the year, sometimes really small, sometimes large, but these windfalls represent kind of a golden opportunity to do that. And I think being able to ask people, not in the moment if they'd like to save, but even better if we can ask them 2 months out. One of the experiments that we've seen with Digit was asking people to pre-commit to save some of their tax refund, and that was a really successful intervention, primarily because our temptations are just so much lower when we're asking in advance. People are much more willing to tell their future self what to do and tie themselves to the math, Odysseus style, I think, than they would be in another way. So one successful strategy is, I think, thinking about asking people in advance to commit themselves in the future to do the right kinds of behaviors for themselves. Another kind of thing is, in a similar kind of commitment strategy, is I think saving is we think of saving as kind of an individual activity, something that we do personally. But the truth is our financial behaviors are really tied up in a pretty complex social web. And so I think the idea that we can draw on some of these social factors and social influences to be able to prime people to save more, not just in the standard social norming kind of a way where like, 70% of people are saving, not necessarily even that, but even if it's helping people to connect as a savings pool, I think these kind of communal savings programs are really interesting, and we want to learn more about that. And Commonwealth is doing some awesome stuff that's going to, I think, is really cool. I think they're learning a little bit about like drawing on the influence of children and getting people to use those as motivators. Nothing is as motivating as a small child to set aside some savings. And I think those kinds of social influences are also really important in helping to draw on sort of the real world motivations for financial goals. And so I'll stop there, but I think thinking about things in the future and recognizing that people save for things in their real lives rather than just as a financial decision. I think that's both really important.
Great. And Quentin, I know you built in like specific features in your product, which, leverage some of these behavioral insights. So are there any particular ones that you might want to highlight, which you found particularly sort of useful or valuable for customers?
Yeah, when we were talking a little bit about what we might cover in this conversation, I was laughing because, to answer that question, it's like, okay, well, I'm sitting here with the 3 other groups, FHN, Commonwealth, Common Sense, that we've drawn the most from in designing our product. So I guess I should just like point to all of you and say all the research you've done, that's what we've drawn from. One pattern that I think was most personally impactful for me when we were first designing our savings product was, and I think some of this conversation started with the folks at Commonwealth, was originally the thinking around designing savings not with the goal of just building up a balance, but making it something that was truly like a flexible, liquid kind of account. And I was hearing that, and again, I think a lot of folks have done great research on this topic. And I was looking at our employer partners who pretty much only had retirement-oriented savings programs, right? Which is like the exact opposite of that principle, right? And so that was the thing, again, thinking back 2 years ago when we first started designing a savings product, that really motivated me. It felt like a gap. It felt like this idea of giving people flexibility, giving people the ability to use the funds in a liquid way was something I really wanted us to achieve.
Great. While we're talking about the aspect of liquidity and access to savings and being able to use them, Brian, I know that there was just last month the Fed changed rules around savings accounts and removing any limits on withdrawals. And would you be able to explain a little bit about what exactly changed and why is that important?
Sure, yeah. I'm not a financial regulation expert, but I do get jazzed talking about things like Reg D. So to spend a moment on it, which is essentially, part of our work is to address policy issues that can either remove barriers or unlock opportunities for financially vulnerable people. And so the change you're referring to is that the Federal Reserve agreed to lift rules that limit consumer withdrawals to 6 withdrawals a month for traditional savings accounts. And the Federal Reserve, they noted that this was in part in response to the coronavirus pandemic and this sort of recognition that folks need access to liquid funds. It's a bit unclear to me at the moment whether this is a permanent change or not, but I hope it is a permanent change because we know that 6 withdrawal limit per month can be a significant barrier to financially vulnerable consumers who often struggle with financial volatility more than others. I think Emery talked about this in terms of a shorter time horizon. If this is about saving for the next 2 weeks or the end of the month, you could have expenses come through, more than 6 expenses come through that you need to pull savings from. What that tends to lead to is that folks try to save in their checking account, and then they have to do the mental accounting of figuring out which is my, ready to spend, which is my save that I can pull from spending. It's nearly impossible to save in a more flexible account like a checking account and not have that partition or that set aside. So the fact that this 6 withdrawal limit is no longer mandatory allows financial institutions to offer a savings account that's sort of called a savings account. It's branded as that, but has that liquidity built in so that folks can pull it out as needed and not worry about a frankly confusing regulation that could lead to fees or account closures and was poorly understood. So I think, our call to action is that for financial institutions who haven't, they should remove that limit on their savings accounts. We believe that simply the partition in that name of a savings account is going to keep people saving in that. The 6 withdrawal limit was not, holding those funds in. It was really just sort of causing confusion and these unexpected fees. And hopefully this is an opportunity sort of permanently to remove that restriction now that the financial institutions have the freedom to do so. I think the last point I'll make on that is that when you see legislative action through the CARES Act that allows people to tap into their 401k for liquidity needs, which we all know is a very costly option and should be sort of an option of last resort, going to impact retirement. For us, that's an indicator that additional liquidity is necessary. And so just another point to say, to the extent we can have savings accounts that work for everyone, including those folks who might need to pull funds out more than 6 times in, a given month, that's really important and can increase access.
Great. So we are looking for some audience questions at this point. So let me get you one that has popped up, and we will continue to request our participants to drop in questions in the question panel. I think one of the questions that's interesting is, what are some specific recovery-focused financial health tips that financial institutions or employees should think about communicating? So for example, as employees start returning to work, they will continue to have new expenses related to travel or commuting, or perhaps with childcare or summer camps. So what are some of the things that can be tips that financial institutions or employers can communicate to their employees to continue to manage their financial health as they, again, experience some volatility in their financial lives with the during the recovery phase as things change again?
I can speak to 2 specific things that we're seeing, and we're actually already talking to employers about So the first is, as employees are coming back to work or returning in some way, whatever that looks like for a specific company, the first is having empathy and recognizing the fact that their overall budget picture has changed. So if you're just thinking about expenses, you just mentioned a couple of expenses that likely have shifted, but actually providing resources to help people walk through essentially that recalculation process. And this is actually, I think, an opportunity to really have people make some positive steps toward having a plan in place, having some structure around how they think about the new expense base. The second side of the equation is thinking about and being particularly aware of discontinuities that may exist in income, right? So if you have a situation where certain stimulus payments or unemployment is coming to an end and you're ramping back up at work, especially for an hourly or shift-based worker, recognizing that that's going to be a stressful moment, that's going to be a time that people are drawing down savings and the like, and providing support, and again, recognition and empathy for the fact that's what people will be doing. So those are two things we're already speaking to and already trying to help companies plan for. I think they're going to be more and more important over the next few months.
Great, thank you. I think one of the other questions we had was about savings and spending, because of that conversation we had early on in this webinar. Is how do we help people make that transition to set aside money in that separate account? And what are some of the, again, perhaps tips and tricks that financial institutions and employers can deploy? I know we talked about some of them, to send messaging around like windfall moments and stuff. Are there any other ideas that we would like to share at this time that we haven't covered?
So the idea is thinking about what can financial institutions do to help people to build savings. And I think one of the most powerful tools that financial institutions have is to set up sort of some automation scheme, whether that's through setting up an automatic transfer that's connected to a loan payment. But even if it's finding smart ways to set up sort of an automatic transfer into a savings account, a number of financial institutions have done this, have sort of mimicked this sort of like, not daily, but more regular small transfers over. I think that's a really interesting and powerful idea. But even just having like a tool that allows people a little bit more flexibility in the automated space. Because the truth is, the way most automated transfers are set up, they just don't really match the sorts of needs that even low and moderate income households have. That just their financial, as to Quinton's point, there's these discontinuities in income, expenses that are more volatile and things like that. So people having a little bit more flexibility in the automation space, but having a way to save mindlessly, to automate that savings across a partition into a savings account, really powerful strategy. I think that's a really helpful and easy thing that financial institutions can do because you already have the tools available to you. All of those things already exist. They just need to be repackaged and put together in a way that makes sense for the people that you're trying to serve.
And maybe just to quickly build on that, thinking about the intersection between that automation and the paycheck and the role of the employer, sort of an evergreen opportunity is to promote and encourage and make split deposit as easy as possible. And I think that can happen both on the employer side and on the financial institution side. So whether it's the employer, taking a look at their split deposit process and allowing their employees to, direct a portion of each pay into a separate account, ensuring that's as easy and accessible as possible and all employees are aware of it, but also thinking about how you might work with employer partners that you already have to ensure that employees who maybe don't have a savings account already can get access to one. We know that, credit unions have partnerships with select employer groups and also have fantastic savings accounts. The credit unions, Commonwealth has worked with many to launch prize-linked savings accounts, which have incentives for people to save. As an employer, you could potentially find or work with that credit union that you might already be partnered with to promote that fun and exciting savings account and use that as a way to promote split deposit. Or as an employer, you could provide those prizes yourself. as a way to incentivize folks. So maybe it's a savings account and you add a prize layer on top of that. So trying to be creative in ways to get people to set up that split deposit in partnership with your financial institution partners.
Yeah, I'll just add one very quick thing. I agree with all of that. When thinking about an FI designing a product in the space or thinking about how to modify what they currently do, you essentially have to, from our experience, do two things that seem completely contradictory with one another. So one is to design for your savings to be sort of out of sight, out of mind, and also to very clearly communicate that like instant and like highly available liquidity is there when the funds are needed. And that's like two totally different directions to go in messaging a product, but it's really critical to get those both communicated effectively.
Great. Thank you, everyone. We are now coming towards the end of our time together here. So I want to do a very quick wrap up. What we heard during this webinar today is the fact that even though we are all in an emergency right now, we are seeing people really adopt very unique and different strategies for managing their financial lives. And the fact that a large percentage of people are actually using their savings, but also that a very significant percentage are putting aside money for savings, even if it's money that they intend to use in a week or 2 weeks or a month. But we are seeing just a lot of interest in savings, which means that this is actually a very important moment for financial institutions and employers to think about what solutions you can offer as people are trying to put aside that money. Given the fact that we are in a crisis right now and past experience has shown that people continue to have increased interest in savings through a crisis and beyond, in the recovery phase, even if you as an institution has not started developing a solution around this right now, it's not too late. And I think you can think about what you want to plan for as we are all getting into hopefully a recovery phase soon. I just want to thank everyone for joining us today, and especially our panelists. Thank you, Brian and Emery, for joining this panel, as well as for all the work you're doing on the Emergency Savings Initiative. And Quentin, thank you for being our special guest here today. We are recording this webinar, as I've mentioned before, and so you will be able to see a copy of this in case you missed a few minutes on our website, thesavingsproject.org. And I also wanted to just mention that we have another webinar coming up in July, and that's going to be led by Commonwealth. That's Brian's organization, and we will be sharing information about that soon. The slide you see here up on the screen is about yet another event that we have coming up in towards the end of June, which is our annual Emerge event, which this year is going to be virtual and is going to be open to everyone. So we welcome you to join us as you want to learn more about what's happening in the space of financial health. Thank you everyone again for all of your time, and we look forward to seeing you on future webinars. Bye-bye. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.